As promised, we're going to go through the process of Kundalini awakening, the practical aspects of Kundalini awakening, not to be confused with the symptoms that you might experience physically or even energetically, but what does it actually mean? So we're going to divide the process into 3 parts in accordance with the 3 knots that Kundalini transcends, or Kundalini must pierce through to go to the next level. Now these 3 knots are commonly known as Brahma Granthi, Vishnu Granthi and Rudra Granthi. And what these 3 signify is what is most pertinent for today's post. The Brahma Granthi, Brahma was responsible for creation. So the creative principle, that which brings manifestation, that which creates, that which gives life. Everything to do with this particular knot being pierced is about life and death, is about us, the individuate sense of self, and our fear of killing that, our fear of dying, which also manifests in keeping the race going, in keeping us procreating, because one of the reasons why we procreate is to survive, to keep the legacy alive through our extension, which is those who are our descendants. And this is why we say our ancestors don't live outside of us, but live inside of us. They are us. We are all that has happened before us, because everything that is happening is merely an extension, one after the other. We'll come back to this, so park it for now. The Vishnu Granthi, which is then right up until the heart. So when you get to the heart, now this is where the Vishnu Granthi knot has to be pierced for Kundalini to awaken and rise to that level. Now what is this point all about? By the time you get to this point, so between the Vishnu Granthi and the Muladhara, right? So between the Muladhara and the Anahat, we have a very, very long way to go. Now, in between these stages, what we have is the pleasure. Vishnu is symbolic of life, the continuation of life, the preservation of life. It's about indulging in both material and spiritual aspects of life. It's to find that balance. It's how do we maintain that life. So everything that we see around us is a maintenance of that which has been created. So once we have that fear of life and death, so we have already been created. Now the next step after creation is how do we preserve this creation? To preserve the creation, and also for creation now to be enjoying itself, to be in that manifest reality. This is where our 5 senses are at their most active. So everything here, emotions, feelings, sensations, sensory perception, will be in this region. Now this is the region which is all that we are most familiar with, and this is where it is about us maintaining who we are, who we expect ourselves to be in accordance to whatever beliefs we've now taken at this level. Because now remember, when we've crossed over Brahma, now we've come into our manifest who we are right now. What do we do generally? What is our lives about? About maintaining who we are, maintaining the ego, maintaining the identity, indulging in sense pleasures, indulging in the 5 senses. Some of us remain in the 5 senses, some of us go beyond the 5 senses. Now this play continues and continues, and it's in this section what we're going to transcend for us to then go pierce the Vishnu Granthi. To pierce the Vishnu Granthi, all that you've accumulated in relation to that. So remember, we've got a long gap in this section to get through. All that you've accumulated, this is now going to now be folded back. So you're turning back. Before, from creation, imagine that you were a seed that's been sown and now you are growing and you're fully in bloom. So to keep that in bloom, we've got to tend to it, and then to maintain that very first seed, that same tree will then produce other seeds, which then keeps it going. But in essence, we are that same original seed that was planted. So in all of that, there is this huge preserving principle, the principle of keeping not just creation, right? Now with all of that, there will be religions that come into play. There will be belief systems that come into play as to how do we maintain ourselves. Now for Kundalini to go past Brahma Granthi, we've got to get over the fear of survival. For her then to pass and pierce through the Vishnu Granthi, we've got to get through the fear of existence. So the fear, not just the fear, but we've got to transcend the five senses. And this is why we say, when you pierce the Vishnu Granthi, this is now where your seat of compassion completely blooms. Your Vishuddha turns into Shuddha. So this is where all that was inaccurate, all that was untrue changes. This is where you now start to experience the truth about existence. Once you have brought yourself into this state where you have even annihilated any knowledge that you have accumulated so far, any ideas that you have about spirituality, it completely, by this point, you have folded in, it disappears. Now when all this goes, Kundalini then rises and pierces the Rudra Granthi. When your Rudra Granthi has been pierced, this is when we say your third eye is now not only fully open, but when Kundalini gets through to that point, this is when we say there is no way back down again. And that the only way you will now be living is to live as somebody who has been liberated of creation, liberated of preservation of that which has been created. And you've now then at this point destroyed all that you thought was created. The tree that came off the seed perishes. And you realize that you were that seed. And that's what Rudra signifies. Rudra, the destroyer. The one that then annihilates. There's no identity. And by the time that you have crossed from Vishnu to Rudra, by this time you would have now been experiencing the various magical supernatural powers, which we call the Siddhis. There are so many Siddhis. These Siddhis, when you become accustomed to them, you may decide to stay here, and a lot of people get stuck here. The Siddhi stage, it is so subtle that you may not even realize that you're pandering to the Siddhi as opposed to now having annihilated and acting from pure consciousness. Once this then happens and you've released all of that, when the Rudra Granthi has been pierced, you are now in a free fall, a land of the unknown, where anything happens. Now everything is open. A lot of you almost moved away from an involvement and an engagement with manifest reality, with life. You may be present, you may be doing things, but you remain without impression. This is what we say, you are now a Jivan Mukta, you're a liberated being, because you've been liberated from the cycle of birth and death. So when we're liberated of the cycle of birth and death, it doesn't mean that now you're no longer going to be incarnate. No, you can still come back, but you might come back and you might find yourself as a teacher, a guru. You might be doing other things. You might be a beggar. You might be any vehicle through which some form of transformation is going to take place. So it's not that you won't be born again, but that you're no longer attached to being born or dying. You're no longer part of that process. And now when you're no longer part of that process, you're no longer part of mind and time. When you're no longer part of mind and time, you're no longer in this bubble that has been created by the goddess of creation herself, that has been created, this whole play, this Leela that we say, that is her Leela, that is Kundalini's Leela. And that's why when Kundalini uncoils, she transcends, she shows you, and you're able to transcend. But we're only able to transcend when what her needs are and ours, our desire to ascend, meet. We may have the desire to ascend. We may have the desire, but for all the wrong reasons. And one of the most common reasons is of escapism. Most of us do it without even realizing that we're merely trying to escape a reality that we are dissatisfied with. The fine and a very thin line between wanting to escape it or wanting to merge with that which you are and becoming totally free. Either way, whether you're desiring that total freedom or total engagement with your material manifest reality, either way is no man's land. So it's a question of you simply coming into a state where you're okay either way. There is no desire for either way, because once you're at that point, when you have transcended and you've moved beyond all of this, it won't make a difference to you whether you are materially engaged or spiritually engaged, because they're all the same. Magic usually happens when you allow it to, when you get out of the way. Wisdom is already inside of us. But whether we want to discover is another question. Whether we want to become aware, again, it's down to us.